Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 76. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and the NBA's Final Four is set. And we've got a full recap of all of the action, as well as a full-on preview of the conference finals, as we got the Warriors taking on the Mavs, and we got the Heat taking on the Boston Celtics. NBA action is in full effect. And as we talked last time, our game 6 picks, the last time we did this pod, I went 2-2. 2-2. We'll take it. But coming off the last series, as we add that in, we're 33-25 against the spread for the play-in/playoffs and 45-29-1 against the spread for my NBA picks overall, given out on this podcast. More on that in a sec, but first, daily odds boost. That sounds awesome to us. From the NBA playoffs to the Stanley Cup playoffs to the MLB, DRF Sportsbook is boosting odds daily. Will Kirill Kaprizov score a hat trick for the Wild? Will Kyle Hendricks strike out 8 while towing the rubber for the Cubs? What about Giannis scoring 30 and the Bucks winning? Player props like these are boosted every single day at the DRF Sportsbook, giving you a chance to cash in big. So head over to DRF Sportsbook app or ia.drf.com, check out the My Bets tab, and start betting on some boosts today. Must be physically present in Iowa to wager. So again, coming up, we've got picks for both the Heat and Celtics Eastern Conference Finals and the Mavs and Warriors in the Western Conference Finals. A full recap of what just happened, because, I mean, if you're not stunned by what happened in that Mavericks-Suns Game 7, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. We'll talk a little bit about Giannis and what happened to him and the Bucks in their Game 7, but of course, a full preview and breakdown, including game picks for Game 1 of each of the conference finals with my guy, Matt Russell. All that and more coming up next, and that starts right about now. Well, the NBA playoffs keep moving. The NHL playoffs keep moving. We're in the conference finals of basketball, second round in the NHL. And here to break it all down is my guy, Matt Russell. How you doing, my dude?
I'm good. What perfect timing. It doesn't often work out this way where we get actually a night off tonight. Hey, remember fiction television shows? Because I barely do. My fiance certainly barely does, because we used to actually watch stuff at night, but not for the last couple of weeks. So Monday night, you get to catch up, maybe some Better Call Saul, maybe you get to finish Ozark, something along those lines. And we get to sort of breathe here a little bit to talk about what happened this past weekend, to talk about a fresh start for a bunch of these teams, obviously, with the second round and the conference finals.
Yeah, for sure. And, let's get right to it. As last time we spoke, There were a couple of game 6s in the NBA going on, and I went 2-2, which is kind of funny because obviously, the Suns, not the Suns, we can start with the Suns. The Suns did not come through. They struggled. The Bucks also did not come through. And then on the flip side, you have the Heat and of course the Warriors, and those two games were completely different. Let's break this all down. But first, as I mentioned, 2-2 from our last pod. Bringing the record has been hitting just like 500 records the last much, which is just like stating the overall great start, but still keeping decent 33-25 in the play-in playoffs. Give me 45-29-1 against the spread in the NBA picks overall on the pod. And we'll start out in the Eastern Conference, right? We have the Celtics and the Heat meeting in the Eastern Conference final. Not really sure how many people would have predicted that, but I also think that the Eastern Conference was the more wide open conference in terms of, there are a bunch of teams that you could have seen being in the final two. The Heat, as mentioned, dominated the Sixers in Philly in Game 6, while the Celtics, fresh off a domination of their own at home in a blowout win against Giannis and the Bucks. Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals goes Tuesday, in Miami. Heat favored by 2. I know you're going to be interested in the totals. We'll talk about that for sure. I find it super interesting because I see this as being a low scoring 90s type series, 90s basketball, maybe even some scores in the 90s. Who knows? But overall, game 1, I'm going to say that I'm going to be on the Heat at home -2.
Okay.
I'm going to be honest, I'm not really sure which way I'm leaning here on the series. If you're forcing me to pick right now at the start of the series, I'm going to take the Heat in 7 just because the home team and I see it being a very close series. But at the end of the day, the Boston Celtics, I think, are the better team, right? Like, I'm not confident. Like, you're forcing me to take a pick, or I'm forcing myself to take a pick for the series and give me Heat in 7, but like Celtics in 6. I think the Celtics just match up well against the Miami Heat. I want to see, like, my basketball brain, like, I want to see a game or two, see how the matchups play out before, feeling confident about a pick. But how do you see these two teams matching up? Because it's going to be a great defensive battle.
Well, first things first, you mentioned the record and you're sort of, humming and hawing a little bit there. I did some quick math on these playoffs, sir, and that record's 56.9% against the spread. And if anybody out there is listening to this bummed out about 56.9% against the spread in any way, shape, or form, it's time to find a new podcast. And I'm here to tell you, you're not going to find another podcast that's doing better than that, especially in the short term. Now, again, as far as this series is concerned, I'm with you on the Heat -2, but it is this thing where, especially in the NBA, where it's almost like a conservative play to be like, you know what, I don't really want anything to do with the series price. I, for one, I don't want to say confused, because I guess I understand it, because it agrees with you in that the Celtics are the better team. But Boston -165 for the team that's starting on the road and doesn't have home court advantage, like, that seems really high to me. And obviously very competitive, if not victorious, in the games in Milwaukee. So I believe Boston actually probably does have a better chance to win a road game than I think Miami does. Mm-hmm. And so then I go, yeah, okay, well, if I think that, then I probably should be favoring Boston. And probably it's not even that Boston's favorite. I could understand a Boston -120, -125, but to get up to the -165 zone here feels a little too high. But when I start rationalizing it by thinking about who can win a road game, et cetera, and then of course the opening game here, -2, you and I talked about, if the teams are equal, the line is going to be about -3, -3.5, right? So it implies that the Celtics are a point to a point and a half better than the Heat. And so when you look at it like that, you go, okay, I kind of do understand that. And like, this is a really short line. And so, means obviously the Celtics are a relatively high probability of winning this first game, but backing the home team, especially after Boston comes off of that 7-game series, now they go back on the road. It is sort of this thing like a wait and see approach, right? Where it's like, if Miami wins this first game, nothing really happens with the series, right? Like, Boston doesn't freak out. Miami doesn't, aren't patting themselves on the back. It doesn't start that almost avalanche or that domino effect, if you will, where if Boston wins game 1, we get into the psychological element of, okay, well, is Boston going to be content with getting the split on the road? And does that make Miami more viable because they're going to be, more desperate in game 2 and all of that sort of thing? So when we say, okay, I'm going to take Miami -2, which I, would agree with here, it is that sort of conservative type play where you're like, okay, I'm looking for nothing crazy to happen in this first game, that like, okay, Miami can win this game, cover this spread, and nothing untoward is going to, no decisions will have been made on this series. And we'll get to sort of see how the first game plays out in order to make that decision going forward. For me, you mentioned the total. We're dropping them. We're starting to drop them down here with Boston. They, another under hits. I think that's something along the lines of, I'm going to screw this up, but 7-4, I think, to the under so far in the postseason for Celtics games. And of course, you mentioned it, right? Like Miami, this idea that maybe we get a couple of games that are both teams are in the 90s. I mean, even if one team was in the 90s, that probably is good enough to hit the under here. But this number is 206.5, which is obviously quite a bit different than the Milwaukee series, which we watched go from 218 sort of precipitously down throughout the series to 213, even 212. And then obviously for game 7, we had to do the game 7 tax thing where we drop it down even further into, I believe it's 208, something along those lines. So now we're down to 206.5 because both these teams are going to grind it out here. And this is going to be that grindy side. And so I just look at it from a series standpoint, right? If the previous 2 series taught us anything, it's that when these teams head on the road or when they're at home, the supporting cast, the Grant Williamses of the world, the Peyton Pritchards of the world are going to step up. Boston's had a little bit more success doing that on the road than the Heat, obviously. And of course, I was wrong on game 6, God forbid, thinking that Philadelphia could possibly show up for an elimination game. What an idiot I am. I said never again to James Harden before, but never again when it comes to James Harden this time around. So, I just go I agree with you, man. I can see this being home team the whole way through. But I do see that I do feel like the Celtics have that better chance of winning that road game. Now, maybe that's just this idea that Miami doesn't have this crazy good home court advantage. And we always talk ourselves into Boston having some great home court advantage, even though we saw them lose at home. In game 1, I believe, in the last series. So I could see this going 7. I got no problem with that. There's probably an over total games bet or a series to go 7 games prop bet in there somewhere. That is probably worth looking at.
Yeah, I could definitely see it 6 or 7. Like you look at those over games, I could definitely see that as being a bet that I'd make. And the thing that I find interesting coming off this Celtics series is I feel like it's not being mentioned enough how big of a deal it was that Milwaukee gave them such a good go without Chris Middleton. And I don't know if it's because Chris Middleton's name isn't because he's not a household name. So people don't fully grasp how good he is, or even if he's not a household name, just what he means to that team. Right. And there was a lot of Grayson Allen minutes. And if you're telling me that, you're replacing Grayson Allen minutes with someone who is just twice as good as Grayson Allen, do you know what I mean? Forget whatever name the person is.
Right.
I'm just saying the thing that's throwing me off about Boston is, they played well. It was a great series. It was back and forth and could have went either way. And, maybe Milwaukee just ran out of gas, whatever cliche you want to use for what happened to Milwaukee in that game 7. But the thing that's throwing me off here and the thing that's making me hesitant about taking the Celtics is, okay, well, why did you just struggle so much against Milwaukee without Chris Middleton? That seems so strange to me. And I'm not making the excuses for Milwaukee for losing, because we know injuries happen in the NBA. We see it each and every single year. So that's a thing, no excuses. But I'm just kind of thrown off about, okay, well, is Boston, do they have the championship, all the extra stuff, the cojones, to get there and get through? Because Milwaukee could have won that series very easily without Middleton. And that's weird to me. If you remove Jaylen Brown off the Celtics, do they how well do they do in this series? Sure. And I know Giannis is a beast. Get that. Totally understand it. But it's just, I don't know. That's what's making me hesitate about taking the Celtics in this series. But I guess the question then becomes, Milwaukee without Middleton, how do you compare that team to the Heat?
Yeah.
Right. And it's
because we talked about how there's Milwaukee has 2 good players and Boston has 4 because Al Horford stepped up in that big way. But I look at Tatum and it's funny, right? Everybody's going nuts about Tatum because he was obviously amazing in game 6 but you still go there was still a game in that series where my guy had 10 points or whatever it was, right? This isn't a consistency level type of thing. This is more a high end level type of a thing. And so whereas with Miami with Jimmy Butler, I feel like you're not going to get that bad game from Jimmy Butler, right? He's bringing it every single night. But I do look at the Heat and I go, is it just him and Bam? And are we going to get into the same spot where it's 2 guys against 4, again, assuming Horford's really good and assuming Marcus Smart is really good. So that, again, like sometimes it kind of is that simple. Yeah. And it isn't because they have lost a guy due to injury. It's just because like the team's kind of just built on the periphery in a lot of ways, right? Like Oladipo isn't that guy. Lowry isn't that guy anymore, right? Like they're trying to kind of piece it together. I don't want to say for like one last run, so to speak, but like they're like, okay, let's get some veterans here to kind of like, fill in the cracks here, but not be that third guy.
Yeah, the big part for Miami, right, is they need Tyler Hero to be what they think Tyler Hero is. And he wasn't, or he hasn't been so far. Well, he wasn't against Philly, right? Yeah. And to make the NBA Finals, they will need that bubble version of Tyler Hero to come back. Now, then we get into this whole concept of, okay, well, is he that guy, or is he just another one of these like role guys where, okay, at home, he'll give you a couple games, he'll play kind of solid, but on the road, who knows what you're going to get? That's going to have to be Jimmy just like doing everything, like in that series against the Sixers where Jimmy's posting up Embiid to get buckets because there's no one else to score on the Miami Heat. So that's the part that's going to be interesting here, right? Because you mentioned Jimmy's going to have to play defense in this series as well, right? I'm assuming he's going to be one of the bodies they try to throw at Tatum, right? With PJ Brown, but even if he's not guarding Tatum, then you're guarding Jaylen Brown. So PJ Tucker is going to be a thing in this series. I know. Did I say PJ Brown? I think I said PJ Brown, right?
You dropped a PJ Brown, which for anybody of a certain age was like, oh man, I like, honestly, you could sell me a PJ Brown having signed like a mid-level exception towards the end of the season, like a buyout type deal. I'm pretty sure he did that towards the end of his career
with the Celtics. Totally with the Celtics.
Yeah, maybe he is going. I don't even know.
So PJ Tucker is what I meant, right? So you have PJ Tucker and Jimmy. You assume they're going to split most of the assignments between Brown and Tatum. But if Jimmy has to do that and also has to score that, then you really need, all those threes from Max Strus, right? You're going to need Tyler Hero. You're going to need Oladipo. You're going to need Bam to like dominate that big guy matchup against Al Horford. And who knows what Robert Williams is at. He hasn't played in the last couple of games. I think he dressed last game, but kind of was like an emergency type thing. Like, we don't really want to play you, but if like, Ish hits the fan, we'll sub you in, but
break glass in case of emergency player.
Exactly. Right. So that's really where this series comes down to. Kyle Lowry, I don't think you can actually rely on getting too much from him, as he's been hobbled in this series, and having to run around and play a physical series against Marcus Smart probably isn't the best way to heal a hamstring injury. I'm pretty sure that's what he was dealing with.
Right.
So I don't know. This series is going to be super interesting. And that's what I mean. I want to see what happens after game one, just to see how the matchups work, to see what the strategy is going to be. What did Miami learn from Milwaukee? Because a big thing from the Milwaukee side, when you pay attention to that, is their game plan was, we're going to pack the paint, we're going to stop the drives, and we're going to give you threes. And when the threes went in for Boston, everything was great. And we talked about this from game one, right? After game one of this series, we talked about that. And then you end up in game 7 where your man's Williams is just bombing threes. I think he took like 13 threes he attempted or something like that.
15 or something. Yeah.
But that's ridiculous, right? But he's wide open and you have to kind of shoot that. So what is Miami's game plan going to be? Is it going to be much of the same? Let those guys shoot. And if they hit them at home, we have more home games. I don't know. I'm super interested in this, but I feel like this is also a series that the generic basketball fan might not actually like, because it won't be the like high flying running gun, up and down series. That's my take.
So I'll put this to you. Let's give you a homework assignment here, right? Because coming into these series, when you look at, first of all, we got one game a night. So you're going to be locked in just the one game. There's no okay, I got to lock in for 6 straight hours here, or, having overlap or anything like that. Let's try to find out after game one or throughout game one, like, where are the prop markets that we can sort of take advantage of based on matchups, right? Like whether it's even rebounding, assists, something along those lines. Let's have a real strong, like, hard look at these first games let's see. What's this first one's on Tuesday? Yeah. So Tuesday and then Thursday. So we only have one game between now and the next time we speak. Like, let's try to figure out matchup wise where we can kind of take advantage of the prop market, because I think like at this point, you know, we always talk about it with regards to football season and some of these sort of, you know, high profile type sporting events. The line for the game is always going to be really, really tight, right? Like -2 is a fair line. There's probably nothing crazy there. As I just looked at the total, I wrote down 206.5 from last night upon open. It's already down to 204, right? That line went 2.5 points. So the good news is got a pretty good beat on where the line should be. Yeah. The bad news is too late as far as getting the best of the number when it comes to the total, but we don't have any prop bets up yet. Worth mentioning +210 for this series to go 7 games. Doesn't matter who wins, just as long as it goes 7 games, +210 for that out there.
I like that.
So I'm looking at game 1 going like, okay, you know, what about these matchups are we going to be able to take from game 1 to bet into game 2, 3, 4, and so on?
I'm looking at Bam. Bam is a big thing for me here, because if he is able to dominate that center matchup with either Horford or Williams, and I mean, Williams is hobbled, so either way, I would hope that Bam should be able to win. Like if he is, again, I'm looking at Miami and I'm saying the same thing I said about Hero. If you are who we think you are, Bam, this is where you come out as, you know, a top big guy in the league, and you dominate your matchup. You control the glass, you control the paint. So I'd be looking at props for, you know, things like blocks or things like Bam rebounds, because he should be able to dominate that matchup. Al Horford, what he was able to do in that first series, cool. But look at the matchups, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about Brook Lopez, who's mostly playing perimeter, right? You're looking at him guarding the paint in that wall that you're building against Giannis. It's just a very different type of defensive assignment, defensive matchup. If you think about whoever would be guarding them, they're kind of floating because so much more attention is being paid to Tatum and Brown and the 3-point line, which opens things up for, you know, Horford to have, and hey, credit to him for stepping up. Cool. Yeah. But now Bam is supposed to be a focal point of the offense. Can he dominate that matchup? He'll get the ball at the top of the key and just trying to go downhill consistently. That's what I'm really interested in seeing how Bam Adebayo does, and that will be key. The other thing would be Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero, I think, has to know that his role in this series, you got to come off the bench and cook and get buckets. So if it's threes from Tyler Hero, you know, you're looking at something like, I'm not sure what the line is or if there is a line already out for Tyler Hero threes for game 1, but I'm looking at if it's like 2.5, 3.5, something around there.
Yep.
If they're going to win, he has to go over. Right. Yeah. So it's like things like that would be the 2 main things that I look at from the Heat standpoint. From the Celtics standpoint, Jason Tatum's points, just because I think everything's going to be on the under, I would look for Tatum's points to be on the under as well, because Miami is going to put him through the ringer, and it's going to be a grind for him to get buckets. And we've seen this before from Spo being able to draw up, you know, that defense where they're playing man-to-man, but it's really kind of a zone at the same time. Yeah. So I'd look at Tatum unders. So I guess, you know, Tatum unders, Bam over in terms of rebounds, blocks,
and maybe some like Horford under too, right? Because you mentioned like that was a super comfy matchup, because like Lopez over the course of his career has like become this perimeter threat, or however you want to sort of play it. It's like, well, that's Al Horford, and so Al Horford's looking. It's almost the Spider-Man meme, only like it's not Spider-Man and Spider-Man. It's Spider-Man and like whatever's less than Spider-Man, me. You know, I don't know. Like he's just, you know, it's Al Horford, but like worse when it comes to Lopez, right? Well, now you get Bam, and like that's not going to be that matchup. And so like there's probably a reason why Al Horford looked 10 years younger throughout this series in certain games, right? I don't know that we're going to see that this time around. Now, is his number going to be inflated to the point where he's, you know, like 14.5 or something from a point standpoint? Like, I don't think so. So like it might not be like the greatest sort of, you know, value that we'll ever see, but it's something worth looking at in that series.
The one last thing I want to just say about this series that has nothing to do with gambling. I'm sorry, the series that just happened between Milwaukee and Boston has nothing to do with gambling, but a lot of the narrative that people are talking about is about how the last day of the regular season, the Boston Celtics started all their players and won. and the Milwaukee Bucks sat all their players and lost. And obviously we just saw that the second round matchup ended up being Celtics getting home court advantage because of that decision. Mm-hmm. The part that all these NBA people are leaving out, and it's probably on purpose because you don't want this to be the focus, is that part of the reason why Boston was so focused on winning, well, two things. Milwaukee was focused on losing because they didn't want to play the Nets in the first round, right? Like, do you want to play the Nets in the first round or do you want to play the Bulls in the first round? So they were like, okay, we're cool to lose. The thing from the Boston standpoint was they couldn't really mess around with losing because if they fell to 4, they would have been Philadelphia, and they have players who are unvaccinated. So we saw that Matthias Thybulle wasn't able to play against the Raptors. And if that's Jaylen Brown not being able to play games in Toronto, like that's the actual reason why the Celtics were going for the 2 seed. Everyone's trying to turn this into they tried their best on the last day of the season. And now, having the matchup in the second round, that's why you play right to the end so that you get home court advantage in a potential second round.
I did that.
No, but
I said it, right? I was like, I was
watching TNT and that was Ernie's whole on camera, right? And I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, that's true. That's true. But like, there's also another side to all this that was probably a way bigger deal, right? Like, do we have Jaylen Brown for half of the series if we have to play the Toronto Raptors? That is a massive, massive deal. But story for another day. Congrats to the Boston Celtics, who are riding this wave of being the best team in the NBA since Christmas, and now find themselves in the Eastern Conference Finals. And maybe not a place that most people would have predicted them to be at the start of the year. But hey, that's why you play the regular season. We'll get back to the pod in a sec. But first, be a pro and win. Introducing DRF Sports all-new premium data feature on drf.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is just $8.25 a month, you can get industry-leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With so many big sporting events here, it's the best way for you to make some money this postseason and have fun while doing it. That's DRF Sports Pro. Sign up now at drf.com/sports. As we switch over to the West, I mean, the Warriors, people were excited to see them back in action as a squad after a couple down years due to injuries. And now they're back in the Western Conference Finals. So Warriors did what we thought they would. Game 6 at home. They hit some shots. It took a while, despite playing against the Ja Morant-less Memphis Grizzlies. They started hitting shots late, and they end up covering that spread, which was a weird game because at the very end, they just start turning into those Warriors where it's like, we hit one shot, then you hit another shot, and then the avalanche starts and you can't stop it. Then you see the celebrations and the airplane sellies and we're screaming and yelling. And it's like, you're against them.
It doesn't help that Memphis couldn't hit a shot, right? Or like even a layup to save their life.
If you know me, you know I'm a Jay fan. I'm a fan of JZ, better known as Sean Carter, or I guess lesser known as Sean Carter. And one of his famous lines is, "It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight." Yeah, you're bringing Dylan Brooks down the stretch, right? Like eventually, like shouts to Memphis for keeping that game close, right? But it was close till like about 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and then it's like Dylan Brooks trying to go one-on-one against Steph and Clay. And it's like, it's not really going to work. The other part I found interesting is if you watch, like, this is too inside basketball, but people who don't understand what Draymond Green means to that team, I don't think you actually like watch the games to see the little things that he does to help their offense move, where he just grabs the ball and he starts running and he's like directing traffic, like cut. And he's hitting guys like sorry, I got on my basketball nerd for a second there. But my point is, the Warriors back in the Western Conference Finals, they will now face the Mavs, who blew out the Suns in Game 7. And I'll say this, talk about being stunned. There is no world where I thought, if you were to tell me, forget about what the score was, but if you just said, the Mavs are going to blow out the Suns in a Game 7 at home, I would have told you were crazy. I would have taken that bet. I would have bet everything on, like, there's no chance of that happening. And yet, here we are. It was done right away. Like, my buddy called me because he said he was driving and he saw the score And he's like, wait a second, what's happening in this game? How was it a blowout in the
Right.
first quarter? Like, I'm rushing home to watch the game and
Yeah.
it's already over. I'm like, yeah, it's done. He's like, they can't come back. I'm like, no, if you're watching what's happening in this game, certain dudes like, so Chris Paul, you could tell something was wrong, and we'll get there in a sec. Booker was trying to go hard. Jay Crowder was trying to go hard because he's Jay Crowder.
Yeah.
But everyone else on the Suns, it was like, I don't know what time they thought the game started. I don't know what, like Bridges, Ayton, like, I don't know what those dudes were on or what they were doing or what game they thought they were in, but it wasn't game 7 to go to the conference finals. Huge blowout win. Before we get to the Warriors and Mavs series, I'm pretty sure you probably got something to say about just either the Warriors win or the Mavs. I'll let you go whichever way you want to go there.
Well, I mean, this is why this is really hard, right? Like, this is why betting on sports is really, really hard, because you look at those other games in Phoenix and it was blowout, right? And we were on those each and every one of them, -6, -6.5 throughout the series. And the last time we spoke was before that game 6. And I said, like, this Suns team, like, this is the team that's going to close out Dallas on the road.
Yeah.
And
I was right there with you.
If that's what this team is, like, if this team is championship caliber, and there isn't any real reason to think that they aren't, because it's not like this team that's failed consistently year over year. It's a team that was literally in the finals last year and, you know, ran into Giannis's 50 points and, you know, triple doubles and whatnot. So it's like, I don't have any reason to, like, disparage Phoenix. Now, obviously, like, the Chris Paul element there, and it's just funny, like, the weird RIP feeling to the Bucks title defense, right? Where it's like, as everybody likes Giannis so much, that it was like, oh, like, you know, good job, like, nice effort on defending the title. Whereas, like, on the Phoenix side, because everybody hates Chris Paul so much, it was like dancing on the grave. But moreover, because, like, we want to be entertained. And, like, if you are looking forward to these game 7s this weekend, especially with both leagues going, the NHL brought it, as it always does, just by nature of the sport. And sometimes the NBA falls flat, and you didn't expect it to fall flat with Phoenix. And so when I looked at game 6, and I was like, man, you really, not only did you not win that game, but, like, they weren't particularly competitive in game 6. That's why I didn't bet the game. If I had bet the game last night, I'd have tweeted it out. I said, I'm back on my Suns BS at -6, -6.5. But I didn't, because I was like, that's concerning. So, like, the signal wasn't that they lost game 3 or game 4, because game 3 was a very reasonable loss. Game 4 had all the excuses in the world with the Chris Paul foul out. But what was the excuse in game 6? Because you and I talked about, like, this is, it's a spot where the Suns have been in before and closed out, literally in the previous round. But it's also a spot that, like, should have all of the motivation and yada, yada, yada. And I know people are going to tell me about Chris Paul's injury and all of that sort of thing. But, like, that's kind of the point, because, and I'm going to give Dallas some credit in all of this, and I'm going to give Jason Kidd some credit, which is sort of a weird thing to say, because I don't know that anybody really thought Jason Kidd was that great of a coach in his stints with Milwaukee and with Brooklyn. I'm impressed that he's like, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to basically drag an injury out of Chris Paul, right? And we're not going to go and try to injure him, but we are going to put that old guy body, right, that smaller body, in everything. We are going to hunt him on defense. We are going to pick him up full court on offense. We are going to make it excruciating for him. And, like, maybe that's not going to work in game 1 or game 2. Maybe they didn't even get to that strategy yet in game 1 or game 2, but it's going to work throughout a series. And that's why I don't want it to sound besmirching of Chris Paul, because he's a Hall of Famer and all that sort of thing. But at some point we might just realize that Chris Paul is a really awesome point guard, but he's not physically built to carry a team as much as mentally he wants to. And he can go into point God mode. Look around the NBA. That's just not what the NBA really has ever been. It's, you know, as much as people say, like, basketball point guard, like we talk about college basketball point guards all the time, the NBA isn't really a point guard league. right?
Well,
It's a wing, it's a height and a strength and like guys the size of Giannis and guys the size of LeBron. And it's so impressive that Chris Paul can get as far as he can get. But if he's your number one, and by the way, like Devin Booker sort of coming in there and he's like, he can obviously score in bunches and we get excited because any given night he'll drop 50. But it's like, I'm not looking at Devin Booker going like that guy's a top 5 player or an MVP candidate or whatever. That's just not where I'm at with him. And then obviously DeAndre Ayton like has the physical skills at some point, but that guy might be better off on a team that doesn't involve Devin Booker or Chris Paul, at least sort of going forward. Now I'm sure he's probably learned a ton from Chris Paul in this short period of time. And so I just look at it and I go like the NBA, why would I, and I look at myself and I go like, why would I focus on a point guard when there isn't really much history of that? Like the best point guard, arguably all the time, was Magic Johnson, who's like 6'9", 6'10", like, you know what I mean? Like he had the size, like he wasn't breaking down or wasn't sort of vulnerable to breaking down the same way that a 6'1" Chris Paul can break down. And so like the best player in this series was always Luka Doncic. And we talk about the NBA being like, okay, you start with who's got the best player on either side. And when we talk about Miami, Boston, like, right now, we'll talk about how Jason Tatum is probably the best player in that series, but like a week from now, Jimmy Butler might be the best player in that series because that's just what Jimmy Butler does. And so we go, okay, like the Mavs have Luka and a bunch of others, and this is going to be a weird comp going forward. This Mavericks team kind of reminds me of the Orlando Magic with Dwight Howard, not because they are built necessarily in the same way, but that was a 1 in 4 out, like at a time when people weren't really doing 1 in 4 out. And it was just like, okay, throw it into Dwight or kick it out for threes. And they got to the NBA finals by doing that. Whereas Luka, obviously the game has changed. You're not going to just throw him in the post constantly the way like, you know, Dwight Howard was in his prime. You're going to do it in a different way, but it's really just like, hey guys, you just hit some open shots because Luka's going to create that for you. It's done in a different way, but they're, you know, I think he's going to drag them to the finals. Like spoiler alert, I think they're going to win this series. Because again, I think Luka's the best player in this next series.
It's, you know what it is. I think the comp is more so those LeBron late Cavs teams, or maybe even LeBron now with the Lakers without Anthony Davis. But it's more so just having the big guard and putting shooters around him, and everyone else kind of just has a role. Like you guys play defense, you guys hit open shots, I'll get you open shots. Be ready to shoot, right? And I came on here talking reckless about Luka, talking about how I didn't think he had enough to carry a team through a playoff run, didn't think he was in shape, didn't think all of those things. All of those things I said into a microphone, and I'm not going to lie to you, I still believe those things. This loss to me, like the Dallas Mavericks overall, when I look at them as a team, yes, I was wrong, right? Yeah. Never going to, like, there's no argument there. But when I look at what happened to the Suns are a team, as you mentioned, they're built as in the collective, right? Like we know Chris Paul isn't that Chris Paul. Chris Paul is going to be able to give you spurts now, right? He'll spend the beginning of the game trying to get everyone else going. And then fourth quarter, okay, I'm going to make plays. I'm going to make the plays down the stretch. I can bring us home. Early on, we need Book and we need Ayton. We need to get busy, to get buckets, and we need our other guys, Bridges, Cam Johnson, those guys to like hit open shots. Jay Crowder, hit open shots. And so when you have a team built like that, that's based on the collective, and one of those key pieces don't show up, or in this instance, in a game 7, none of those pieces show up. Like there was a play early on in that game where they passed it into Ayton. And it was a perfect pass leading him right to the basket where he could just get it, gather, and dunk. And instead he reverse pivoted and did like a fading hook shot and missed. And I was kind of like, what's happening here? And then something came out because he only played under like 15 minutes in last night's game.
I think it was, it's like 15 in the first half or something like that.
And when asked about it, Monty kind of said that's internal.
Yeah.
So like something happened, obviously on the bench. I'd assume he's probably mad, angry. Who knows? Bottom line is none of their 3 main guys showed up. None of their role players showed up, and you have no chance in winning. And that's why you don't want to go to a game 7 when you don't have the best player in the series, right? Because you can't, like, you go into a game 7 where anything can happen. And now you're giving Luka a chance. Those guys are playing with house money right? They're playing with house money. They're playing super confident. They won that game 6, right? And you mentioned Jason Kidd and the job he's done. I think one of the best parts of what he's done with this team is role definition. So this is what Luka does. Cool. The rest of you guys are out there gooning, playing defense, getting on the glass. Like you're talking, you got guys like Finney Smith, right? He's playing hard defense on Chris Paul all the way up the floor, as you mentioned, right? You got, what's my guy with the hair? Why am I drawing a blank that shoots the threes? I'm drawing such a blank right now. Anyways, not important. Another dude,
the guy with
Reggie
hair.
Bullock. You know what threw me off? Because he just changed it and told the reporters that his name is pronounced Bullock.
That's right.
That's what
that
threw
threw
me
everybody for a loop.
Bullock. My name is not Bullock. It's Bullock. Okay. But anyways, you got Bullock. You got all these dudes who your roles are defined to the point where Spencer Dinwiddie, you just come off the bench and cook. Right? Yeah. Luka goes to the bench. Luka plays off the ball. You let him cook. You let Brunson cook. It's role definition, but they play so hard. So if you're not going to match their intensity, all those other guys, not named Luka Doncic, if you're not matching their intensity, you're in trouble. And I agree with you in the sense of the Mavs making this series spicy. And I know this sounds like I'm sitting on the fence in terms of the series because I'm saying the same thing I said about the Eastern Conference playoffs. I'm going with Warriors in 7, but like the Mavs, if you tell me the Mavs are able to pull this off, I'm not going to argue with you at all because these are not your same Warriors, right? Yeah. These are not the Warriors we think they are. And when you look at that line for game 1, it's 5.5 for the Warriors. Like I'm on the Mavs in that game 1, right? And for no other reason, just that, you know, the Warriors, who's guarding Luka first off, right?
Right.
Because if you're telling me it's Andrew Wiggins, I mean,
nope.
Yeah, right.
No.
So
no.
Right. So if it's not Andrew Wiggins, Draymond is too big. Like he can't do that. Clay might try to give it a go, but you need Clay's scoring. So you probably don't want to give him that assignment at this stage. Like, I don't know. And again, the Mavs have the bodies to throw at Clay, to throw at Steph. And you don't think J Kidd's going to do the same thing to Steph that he just did to Chris Paul, right?
Yeah.
Like you are going to be guarded by a bigger guard the entire time. And the one part I want to give you credit for in bringing up the Jason Kidd factor. Jason Kidd was that point guard.
Well, that's yes. That was so I was literally just waiting for you. I was like going to mention, like, by the way, like, he was that dude.
He knows what it's like to age as a point guard and what makes it difficult on you for an entire playoff series, right? So it's I can't believe I'm saying this and talking about the Mavs possibly being in the NBA finals because it sounds so insane to me, but like we're here.
So, yeah. And so, like, honestly, you know, we talk every episode about coaching and like the historical ramifications of what happens when sometimes you just find yourself in the right place at the right time. Right. And like you take advantage of kind of some good fortune along the way or this, that, or whatever, because so much of this, as much as we try to like break this down and try to be as predictive as possible, like fundamentally, a lot of this just kind of comes down to luck. And like the Warriors have gotten really, really lucky so far, right?
They have like very easy
getting, you know, like leading up to this postseason. I mean, a couple of things here, right? Like one, leading up to this postseason, like the Warriors could have gotten the Mavericks in the first round, the way that everything was sort of jostling and shaking down, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
They didn't. They got the Nuggets instead, a team that nobody thinks that highly of, right? Like other than Jokic, like literally being
injuries,
Jokic. And exactly. And again, not their fault because of, you know, the injuries and whatnot, but like that's the best case scenario. We talked about that. That's why we were on the Warriors, you know, -2.5 on the series line, because we're like, I don't really think that much of the Nuggets. Then they get Memphis. And when the injury happened, it's game 3. The injury to John Morant happened. It's game 3 and the Warriors win that game comfortably. And like, there's sort of this like feeling when that happens, like, oh, this series is over. And we almost kind of think to ourselves like, oh, because it's now over, because John Morant is out, that it was always going to be over. You know what I mean? Like that there was no way the Grizzlies were going to win if Morant was still in that series. But the very next game, even without Morant, Memphis competes, right? Like they have the lead. Again, everybody pretty much agrees they probably should have won game 4. Then they annihilate the Warriors in game 5. And as you mentioned, right up until about 5 minutes to go, I can bust out the old shot quality stats here. The shot quality was even in that game, but Memphis just stopped making shots in the last 5 minutes. Would that have been the case with Ja Morant in the lineup? And so there's an alternative universe where we see a 7-game series. We see something along those lines where, by the way, maybe Memphis does the same thing that Dallas did to Phoenix. Yep. We will never know that. And because the way people think about sports, we just assume that the Warriors always win that series, in the same way that if, say, Chris Paul hadn't fouled out of game 4 and the Suns had won that game and then finished it off in 5 games at home, we would have the same attitude, that Dallas was never going to win that series.
Margins are so slim.
Exactly. Only in the alternative universe actually happened to be this universe, and it ended up going 7, and it got dragged out. And Chris Paul, whether it was banged up, whatever, that was part of the game plan for Dallas to drag that out. And so I just look at this and I go, okay, the other element is from before the playoffs start, Luka gets hurt in that last game of the regular season. And because we take so much energy, especially as the play-in tournament's going on and all of that stuff, we look and we have this full week to think about it. And we dismiss Dallas, in our brains. And I'm talking psychological type stuff here. We literally dismiss the Mavericks for a week, to the point where I was sitting there, you'll remember game 1, I was like, are we positive they should be 5-point underdogs at home, even without Luka, to this Utah Jazz team? Are we sure that's the thing? And Utah pulls off the miracle cover in that game. And then Dallas wins the next game and then goes on to win the series. And again, rightfully so. And part of that's because Luka came back. Don't get me wrong. But if Luka was healthy, and we didn't have a week to dismiss the Mavericks for that, period of time, are we thinking differently about the Mavericks now? We have taken this 2-week to 3-4 week period of time. And part of that is because they faced the Suns. And listen, I talk more than anybody about how useless the regular season is. And if the Suns are going to pad their stats from a win-loss record, and we look at it oh, they won 65 games and blah, blah, blah. This is a juggernaut team. Well, the playoffs are a different animal. Every other sport, the playoffs are a different animal. And so I just look at it and I go, we've never really given Dallas this fair shake the way that we might have if Luka had been healthy before the playoffs started. Because if he's healthy before the playoffs start, 1, they're favored by a great deal against Utah. They probably sweep Utah. And then we think that we're oh, Luka, he, listen, what's the phrase? He is him. I'm way too old to be using it, but we would probably have that attitude where we're okay, who are the guys who can drag a team the way that has happened in basically every year in the history of the NBA? Who are those guys? And it's if Luka isn't on that list of guys who can be the difference and be that player that can drag his team to a finals, that can upset this team or that team, I think we would have been on the Mavericks. Because of that injury, we sort of got thrown off the scent, so to speak, because then they end up in this weird series against the Jazz. And obviously, a real tough matchup with the Suns, or theoretically tough matchup for 3 out of the 7 games anyway, as they got absolutely destroyed in some of those,
Yeah. I mean, my whole thing that I still will never understand when I'm watching the teams go against Luka, why am I letting him get a screen onto my big consistently every single time? We know that's food, right? And every time it ends up Luka on an island against DeAndre Ayton, and Ayton has no chance. It's not even fair for DeAndre Ayton. I don't understand why you're not just double teaming off the screen every single time and forcing the ball out of his hands. And if all those other guys are going to hit shots for the whole series, cool. But the same defense that we're talking about the Mavs employing on Chris Paul and what they're probably going to try to do to Steph Curry as well, I'm doing the same thing to Luka. And maybe I'm taking Kuminga and saying, yo, your whole job is to just be athletic and deny Luka the ball, guard him all the way up the floor, guard him and you get fouled out, cool, whatever, doesn't matter. But I'm trying to make your life, I'm going to run you throughout the whole series. That would be instead of just allowing the screen to happen. And a lot of this comes down to, and this is basketball nerd stuff again, but when you watch the highlights and how easily dudes guarding Luka will just accept the switch. The screen comes and Bridges is like, oh, I'm not really going to fight over that screen so hard. Like, let's just switch and see what happens. Like, that's the little stuff when you're watching early and you're like, oh, this game's over and Bridges wants no smoke, right? Like, not even a chance. And, you know, even Cam Johnson came off the bench and he tried, but he's still on Luka
leading
Island.
Scorer of the game, for the Suns, Cam Johnson.
Right, but Cam Johnson came and he's trying to play hard defense, but you're on Luka Island, bro, one-on-one, and that's not a good life to be in, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. You mentioned the Chris Paul thing a couple times. I want to get this in though. Suns point guard. This was tweeted out by Marcus Spears. Chris Paul limped out of the arena with a very slow walk, and they learned that Paul had a left quad injury. When asked about the quad injury, Paul declined to comment. I bring that up not because we're surprised by that news, because A, we watched the games and noticed that something was off from the past however many games, but B, we've seen the story before from Chris Paul. C, I really bring this up because your man's Pat Beverly just reminding me why I love the NBA so much. Pat Beverly in the middle of the game tweeted out, he's like, just watch, just wait and see. We're going to hear about someone's injury post game. And then what happened? Boom. And then we got Anthony Edwards Instagramming the score of the game. And he's like, I know we're out of the playoffs, but what is this? It's just like, this league is insane, right? Like absolute insanity, absolute insanity.
But just, you know, and the last thing on that, like on the thing about Luka, like it's funny, right? Because physically Luka is such this interesting character in that, like, the game plan will, you know, it's easy to say, like, I'm going to tire this guy out or tire that guy. And you try to do it to LeBron and LeBron just like, no. You try to do it to Giannis and Giannis like, no. Imagine's probably the same case with like a guy like Tatum. But like Luka, like obviously is the height and weight of somebody who can play a physical style of the game. Whereas like Chris Paul, like he's just always up against it. And that's what's incredible about Chris
Paul. He's old.
And that's again, like all of it is like the stew of like really incredible, ability, but like it's also just going to happen every time, and it's going to happen quicker every year. So when he says, "Oh, I'm going to come back next year," it's like, okay, well, when should I schedule the quad injury for? Because you made it like 10 games of a playoff run, or maybe 11, and then you got the quad injury. So is there like a math equation where like one more year means like one less game you can get through in the playoffs? Like, how is this going to work?
Their run's over.
Yeah, I'm with you. But Luka, like we beat him up because like he's quote unquote out of shape. But like, listen, like he's never going to be like, carved out of stone, so to speak, right? Like people have different body types. There's a certain like, maximum that you can sort of be. And like, yeah, he could be a little bit thinner, I suppose, but like, he's just not going to be like a jacked dude out there. Right. And so like, it's working for him. Now, again, we want the injuries to not happen. And like, but really like, how much does one thing have to do with another? Like, that's something that honestly, I think like medical professionals would probably have differing opinions on. Some would just like be like, well, he needs to get in better shape. And others are like, my guy's out here like raining, buckets here and like 40-point games and all of that sort of thing. Like I can't beat him up too much about like what his physical stature is at this point. So I think he can handle it, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. Like it's this weird sort of halfway in between thing where you look at LeBron and be like, okay, that guy's impervious to this. And then you look at Chris Paul and you're like, that guy's going to be, vulnerable to this. And then Luka's somewhere in the middle where like, depending on the day, you're like, nope, out of shape, can't do it. Or like, oh my God, like he's on one leg, still better than everybody else out there.
Sorry, I had to look it up to find the tweet that actually had me laughing during the end of that game. This is from someone named @MasterTess on Twitter, but says Luka was on a McChicken's vodka and hookah diet all summer and still led the Mavs to the Western Conference Finals. McChicken's vodka and a hookah diet.
I love it.
That's great. Yeah, you're totally right. And in Luka, credit where credit's due. He put in the work. Jason Kidd, I think, got the rest of the team in order to have them understand how to, I forget whose line it is, what coach it is, but be a star in your role. right? Like, and the Mavs are here. This Warrior series is going to be very, very interesting. And the Warriors should not lose. Like, if you're the Warriors, you should not lose this series to the Mavs. But then again, the Suns shouldn't have lost the series to the Mavs either. And I think we just found out how slim the margins are in the playoffs in terms of, you brought up that Chris Paul game 4, right? Like, if that doesn't go that way, how does the rest of the series play out? Right. Yeah. And who knows, right? If Chris Paul, we can't say if Chris Paul doesn't get hurt, because we know Chris Paul is always going to get hurt. But, and I'm not saying that as shade. I'm just saying that as a matter of like fact, like there's history that's shown this, right? So when I look at this Warriors team, and if you're telling me it's still Steph and Clay and Jordan Poole, like, you guys should be able to beat Luka, but the way that certain teams, like, and I'm referencing the Raptors in this case, not because the teams were similar, but I think once you just figure out your roles in a playoff run, and your coaches figure out the better way in each series to put you in a position to succeed, when you get rolling, that confidence is a mother effer. And the Mavs just look like that team right now that, like, I've seen Tim Hardaway Jr. on their bench, right? Like, he's hurt in a suit, and not a suit, but in his street clothes. It's just like, oh yeah, they have that guy too. Like, they could really use that guy right now, but they're rolling. And I don't know, man. Again, Warriors in 7, and I'm just saying that because of the home court and off of like pedigree that I'd hope that if you are Steph Curry, who you tell us you are, who they say you are, you shouldn't lose a series to the Mavs.
Well, listen, it's -5 right now, so it's already down from 5.5. So again, good news is like we pinpointed at least a half point of value in there. I'm going to be on the Mavs money line in game 1. I'm going to be on the Mavs on the series, and I'm going to probably bet the Mavs every single time, because honestly, listen, the Warriors should be favored. I understand all of that. Yeah. The price is
it's way too
high, and it's based on branding and reputation. 1,000%. And like, I'm going to say hello to Klay Thompson right now, because clearly he listens to the podcast, because he absolutely shoved it in my face last week when he went off. After I said that, like, I'm not feeling, where Klay's at right now. But like, that's the point. Like, Klay's capable. He's capable. It's a consistency element, right? Exactly. Like, he's not going. That's what goes. The consistency goes first, not the ability to do it, or he would have hung him up. He would never have come back, right? Like, he's good enough to do it. It's just a matter of getting it ready to go in these games. So it's all Mavs for me.
Yeah, it's a Kenny Smith talks about it all the time, right? Everyone in the NBA can play ball. The difference when you go up in levels between, bench player, role player, starter, superstar, all-star, best player in the league, it's just consistency, right? Like, the guys who are consistent, those are the superstars. And the levels of consistency as you go down, that's your standing in the NBA. But everyone can play. And so Klay Thompson was a superstar, or was a star, but now you're going to get it in spurts. It's not going to be every single game.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, like, again, I mentioned like the Warriors having like a really sort of fortunate go of it. We also like should just give credit to the Mavs for beating the Suns. If we thought that the Suns were the favorite, or should have been the favorite, which again, I still do. Totally. Like, I don't sort of, I'm not going back on that, because again, they should have beat the Mavericks. But like, the Mavericks played really well. Yeah. This wasn't like something weird happened and got the Mavericks through to this level. So like, it's almost, may call it stubborn or whatever, but if I'm going to rate the Suns this high, hand way up in the air, and like a team can beat them, then like, I have to give the Mavericks some credit for like being capable of being up in this region. Hell yeah. Meanwhile, I don't feel like the Warriors have had to get up to that region in order to beat the teams that they've had to beat so far. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it bothers me that they struggled with the Grizzlies without Ja Morant for basically, we said last week, 96 minutes, throw another 43 minutes onto that. Like, that's 100 and doing some quick math here, 139 minutes of struggling with the Ja Morant-less Grizzlies. So like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not like, I need more. I need more from the Warriors.
You're totally right about the Warriors and the public team. And I know we talk about it in the NFL when we're talking NFL bets week in, week out, just like certain teams are just public teams getting a little extra getting a little extra juice on top because of who they are. And that's what it is with the Warriors here. I totally agree with you on that. I can't wait to watch both of these series. I don't really like either the Warriors or the Mavs, like in terms of like either of those teams, not really teams I root for or cheer for. I guess like the only team I don't know who I'm rooting for, like in my basketball fandom. I don't know, but either way, going to be super interested to watch both of those series as the NBA playoffs obviously continues. But either way, my dude, where can the people find you online to get more of your information and education, as I like to say?
I tell you where they can't find me is online sometime between 7 p.m. and onwards tonight, because again, I'm shutting it down. Everybody get some sleep, because these next 2 weeks, as the previous 2 weeks, are going to be electric. Otherwise, at MRussAuthentic on Twitter, I got a couple more previews for these last two series, the ones that were decided last night in the NHL. So I got a couple of those. Going to do a little Conn Smythe redux. My guy Connor McDavid still alive. My guy Matthew Tkachuk still alive. Both of those guys still, one of those guys is surviving. That's great news. Unfortunately, the bad news is one of those guys is definitely not surviving this next week, but we knew that was going to happen. And then the PGA Championship coming up this week. So we're going to have a couple of different pieces on that as well.
Sounds good, my dude. Thanks for stopping by. As always, we'll catch up down the line.
Thanks, man.
And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder, if you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, it stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. Of course, we got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.